The airport thrummed with its usual morning chaos, a low hum of announcements. The shuffle of rolling luggage. And the soft chatter of travelers heading to countless destinations. For Elliot James. A 15-year-old boy standing quietly in the check-in line. It was all a bit overwhelming. His fingers tightened around the strap of his worn backpack as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Trying to appear calm. Inside the bag were the carefully packed tools of his dreams, folded clothes. A notebook filled with sketches. And a folder of documents that represented months of hard work and sleepless nights. Elliot wasn't used to places like this. The airport's glossy floors. Towering windows. And brisk efficiency felt worlds away from the small apartment he shared with his mother. This was his first flight. And it wasn't just any trip. He was headed to Chicago to compete in an international STEM competition, a chance to showcase the sustainable energy prototype he and his teammates had designed. It was, as his mother had said with pride, the opportunity of a lifetime. She'd worked extra shifts as a nurse to make this trip possible. And her parting words echoed in his mind, "Show them what you're made of." Elliot. The line inched forward. And Elliot found himself at the counter. The agent behind it. A woman in her 40s with sharp features and a tightly pinned bun. Glanced up briefly. Her name tag read Ms. Davenport. "Good morning," Elliot said. His voice polite but subdued as he handed over his ticket and ID. Ms. Davenport offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She scanned his documents with a practiced efficiency that faltered as her brow furrowed. Her gaze shifted to Elliot. Lingering for just a moment longer than necessary before returning to her screen. She said. Her tone clipped. "There seems to be an issue with your ticket." Elliot's stomach tightened. An issue? Her lips pursed. And she let out a breath that sounded more like a sigh of annoyance. "It's showing as invalid." "Did you book this yourself?" "No, ma'am. My school arranged it. I confirmed it last night." Ms. Davenport's eyes narrowed. "Are you sure? This isn't exactly the kind of ticket that just anyone can afford." The words were spoken with a smoothness that could almost be mistaken for concern. But Elliot felt their weight. He stiffened. Heat rising to his face. Around him. The quiet murmur of the line seemed to grow louder. He glanced down at his shoes. Scuffed and well-worn. And then back at her. Struggling to steady his voice. "It's valid," he said quietly. Ms. Davenport clicked her tongue. "Well. It's not looking that way on my end. Step aside. Please. I need to assist other passengers." The dismissal was swift. Final. Elliot hesitated. His heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to argue. To insist she look again. But the line of waiting travelers had begun to shift impatiently. Some were glancing at him now. Their expressions unreadable but unmistakably curious. He stepped aside. Clutching his backpack tightly as if it could shield him from the mounting embarrassment. His mind raced. Weighing his options. Could he call his teacher? Would there be enough time before the flight? From the corner of his eye, he noticed the way Ms. Davenport had already moved on. Her tone brisk and efficient with the next passenger. For her. It seemed. This was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a fleeting moment she would soon forget. For Elliot. It was something else entirely. The whispers started behind him. Low but audible enough to sting. "Poor kid," someone muttered. "Probably a scam," another voice chimed in. The words hung in the air like smoke. Heavy and suffocating. Elliot's throat tightened. But he forced himself to swallow the lump that threatened to form. He wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not now. Just as he began to turn away, a voice cut through the noise. It was calm, measured, but carried an authority that demanded attention. What seems to be the problem here? Elliot turned to see a tall woman approaching the counter. She was dressed in a tailored navy blazer, and her name badge read Charlotte Hayes, with the insignia of the airline prominently displayed. Her stride was deliberate, her expression unreadable. Ms. Davenport straightened immediately, her professional mask slipping into place. "Oh. Ms. Hayes," she began, her voice suddenly more composed. "There's no issue. Just a misunderstanding with this young man's ticket." Charlotte's sharp eyes flicked from Ms. Davenport to Elliot, then back again. Her tone remained even, but there was no mistaking the edge beneath it. "A misunderstanding," she repeated. "Let me see the ticket." Ms. Davenport hesitated but handed it over. Charlotte examined the document briefly, her brow furrowing. Then she looked at Elliot, her expression softening. "This ticket is perfectly valid," she said, her voice clear and resolute. Elliot blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. "It is?" Charlotte nodded. "It is," she said firmly. Then turned her attention back to Ms. Davenport. "And I'll be addressing this incident personally. But for now, let's make sure this young man gets to his gate." Elliot felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief as Charlotte extended her hand. After a moment's hesitation, he handed over his ID and ticket. She didn't ask questions, didn't make him feel as though he needed to justify his presence. "Come with me," she said simply, her tone leaving no room for argument. As they walked toward the security checkpoint, Elliot dared a glance back at Ms. Davenport. The agent stood frozen at the counter, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes following them with something that looked like resentment. Charlotte didn't look back. For the first time that morning, Elliot felt a spark of hope, tentative but undeniable. Maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be the end of his journey after all. Underscore 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 underscore. This opening combines a calm, reflective tone with a focus on the subtle yet cutting realities of racial prejudice in everyday situations. It appeals to older readers by emphasizing the quiet strength and resilience of the protagonist while setting up the implicit conflict for the rest of the story. The hum of the airport faded into the background as Elliot followed Charlotte Hayes through the terminal. Her confident stride was steady and purposeful, her navy blazer pristine against the bustling chaos around them. Elliot clutched the strap of his backpack, the weight of the morning's events still pressing heavily on him. Charlotte glanced at him briefly. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her tone as calm and measured as it had been at the counter. Elliot hesitated. He wasn't sure how to answer. There were no words to describe the humiliation of being called out so publicly, nor the confusion that lingered in his chest. "I'm fine," he said at last, though his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. Charlotte stopped walking, turning to face him. Her sharp gaze softened slightly, and she crouched just enough to meet his eyes. "You shouldn't have had to deal with that," she said, her voice low but firm. "What happened back there was unacceptable." Elliot nodded, not trusting himself to speak. For a moment, there was silence between them. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt, instead, like the calm after a storm, a brief reprieve before the next gust of wind. "Tell me," Charlotte continued as they began walking again. What's waiting for you in Chicago? Elliot straightened his shoulders. The familiar weight of pride mixing with the lingering unease. A STEM competition, he said. My team built a prototype for a sustainable energy generator. We've been working on it for months. Charlotte's lips curved into a small, approving smile. That sounds impressive, she said. What part did you work on? Mostly the design. Elliot replied. But we all pitched in. My teammates are great. Charlotte nodded. And you're representing your school? Yes. Ma'am. Well. Elliot, she said. Her voice steady. Let's make sure you get there. No one has the right to tell you where you belong. Her words settled over him like a blanket. Comforting but heavy with meaning. He hadn't realized just how much he'd needed to hear them. They reached the security checkpoint, where Charlotte handed over his documents with a brief nod to the officer. There was no hesitation. No questions. Within moments, they were through. As they walked toward the gate, Elliot finally spoke. Thank you, he said. His voice quiet but sincere. Charlotte looked at him. Her expression unreadable. You don't have to thank me, she said. I'm just doing what's right. But Elliot knew better. People didn't always do what was right. He'd learned that lesson more than once. At the gate, the boarding area was already filling with passengers. Charlotte approached the counter. Her authoritative presence immediately commanding attention. The gate agent looked up. Startled but polite. This young man, Charlotte said, gesturing to Elliot, is flying to Chicago. Ensure he's taken care of. The agent nodded quickly, printing a new boarding pass without question. When they handed it to Charlotte, she turned and offered it to Elliot. Here, she said. You're all set. Elliot hesitated as he took the pass. Thank you, he said again. The words feeling insufficient for everything she had done. Charlotte smiled faintly. You're welcome, she said. I've arranged for you to sit in first class. Consider it an apology on behalf of the airline. His eyes widened. First class. But You deserve it. Charlotte interrupted. Her tone leaving no room for protest. And I'll feel better knowing you're comfortable after what happened. Elliot nodded. Unable to find the right words to express his gratitude. As the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, Charlotte reached into her pocket and handed him a small card. If you ever need anything, she said, don't hesitate to reach out. And when you win that competition, let me know. I'd love to hear about it. Elliot took the card, his hands trembling slightly. The bold print read, Charlotte Hayes, Executive Operations Manager. Below it was her contact information. Thank you, he said. His voice steadier this time. Charlotte nodded once. Her gaze steady. Good luck, Elliot. And remember, don't let anyone tell you where you belong. He held her words close as he walked onto the plane. His mind a whirlwind of emotions. He still felt the sting of Ms. Davenport's dismissal. The heat of the stares from the crowd. And the cold press of doubt that had followed him for much of his life. But now, there was something else, a flicker of possibility. Of hope. Settling into the wide leather seat in first class. Elliot glanced out the window. The bustling workers below looked small. Almost insignificant from this height. The hum of the engines preparing for takeoff was steady and reassuring. A flight attendant approached. Her smile warm and genuine. Can I get you something to drink? She asked. Water. Please. Elliot replied. As she moved away, Elliot leaned back in his seat, allowing himself a moment to breathe. For the first time that morning, he felt something other than embarrassment or fear. He felt seen. Outside, the plane began to taxi toward the runway. The vibrations beneath him were a reminder of the journey ahead, a journey that, for all its challenges, he was finally ready to face. The city of Chicago rose in the distance, its towering skyscrapers framed against a pale blue sky. From the cab window, Elliot watched the streets blur past, the morning sun glinting off car windows and glass facades. He clutched the strap of his backpack, which now seemed heavier than it had earlier. Inside lay his team's prototype, a sleek model for a sustainable energy generator, and the hopes and sacrifices that had carried him this far. When the cab pulled up to the sprawling convention center, Elliot paused for a moment, taking in the grandeur of the place. The building's glass exterior reflected the crowds of students and mentors bustling inside, their excitement palpable even from a distance. Above the entrance, a massive banner read, International STEM Innovation Competition 2024. Elliot stepped out of the cab, squaring his shoulders as he joined the stream of participants heading through the revolving doors. He had imagined this moment countless times. But now that it was here, the weight of expectation pressed down on him. The convention center buzzed with activity. Booths lined the expansive hall, each one showcasing projects that ranged from robotics to renewable energy. Voices overlapped in a hum of enthusiasm, punctuated by bursts of laughter and animated conversation. Elliot spotted his team's booth near the back of the room. Lila Patel, their programmer, was already setting up the display board, her dark hair pulled back in a neat braid. Beside her, Ethan Reed, their logistics expert, was unpacking the prototype with his usual precision. Elliot. Lila's face lit up when she saw him. She waved him over, her voice cutting through the din. You made it. We were starting to worry. Barely, Elliot said with a small smile. You wouldn't believe the morning I had. Ethan glanced up from his work, raising an eyebrow. What happened? It's a long story, Elliot replied, setting his backpack down carefully. He didn't want to relive the ordeal at the airport. At least not yet. Let's just say I'm glad I'm here. Lila tilted her head, clearly curious. But she let it go. Well, we're glad you made it. We've got a lot to do before the judges come around. The three of them got to work, falling into the familiar rhythm they had developed over months of preparation. Elliot focused on fine-tuning the prototype, his hands steady as he adjusted the wires and polished the metal casing. It wasn't just a piece of equipment, it was a reflection of their collective determination, a testament to what they could achieve despite limited resources. By the time the judges approached their booth, Elliot felt a mix of nerves and excitement. The panel consisted of 5 industry leaders, their sharp eyes scanning every detail of the display. They introduced themselves briefly before gesturing for the presentation to begin. Elliot stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He had volunteered to lead the presentation, a decision that now felt both bold and overwhelming. Good afternoon, he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. We're Team Horizon, and this is our prototype for a sustainable energy generator. As he spoke, the words began to flow more easily. He explained the design's key features, the innovative materials they had used, and the potential for real-world applications. The judges listened intently, their expressions neutral but engaged. Lila demonstrated the software integration, her confidence shining through as she navigated the interface. Ethan followed with a breakdown of the logistics for scaling the design, his clear and methodical explanations adding weight to their proposal. Elliot concluded the presentation with a quiet but passionate appeal. "This isn't just a project," he said. Meeting the judge's eyes. "It's a vision for a future where sustainable energy is accessible to everyone. And we believe that future starts here." The room was silent for a moment after he finished. The air thick with anticipation. Then the judges began their questions sharp. Probing ones that tested the team's knowledge and adaptability. Elliot fielded most of them. His earlier nerves replaced by a quiet resolve. He didn't have all the answers. But he refused to back down. Meeting each question head-on. When the session ended, the judges nodded their thanks and moved on to the next booth. Elliot exhaled deeply. The tension in his shoulders finally releasing. "We did it," Lila said. Her eyes shining with relief. "You crushed it, Elliot." "You both did too," Elliot replied. A small smile breaking across his face. For the first time all day, he allowed himself to feel the hope that had been building inside him. But as they packed up their materials, Elliot couldn't help but notice the sideways glances from some of the other competitors. He heard snippets of whispered conversations. Their words laced with subtle skepticism. "Did you see his team?" one voice murmured. "They're good," another replied. "But you think they really have a shot?" The words weren't overtly hostile. But they carried an undertone Elliot had learned to recognize, a quiet doubt. An unspoken question of whether someone like him truly belonged in a space like this. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus on what he could control. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, "Show them what you're made of." That evening, as the convention floor emptied and the lights dimmed, Elliot lingered at the booth for a moment. His gaze fixed on the prototype. It gleamed under the overhead lights. A reminder of the journey that had brought him here. This wasn't just about winning a competition. It was about proving, to himself and to everyone watching, that he deserved to be here. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the echoes of a day's worth of ambition and effort, Elliot felt the flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time, the quiet, steady confidence of someone who knew his worth. The next morning, the convention center was alive with the same buzz of energy that had filled it the day before. Elliot walked through the crowded hall with a sense of purpose. Though a quiet unease lingered beneath the surface. The whispers from the other competitors were still fresh in his mind. Their skepticism replaying in fragments. He tried to shake it off, focusing instead on the day ahead, the final presentation. The judges. The culmination of everything his team had worked for. At the booth, Lila and Ethan were already setting up. Lila gave him a bright smile as he approached. "Ready for the big day?" she asked. Her tone light but tinged with nervous energy. "As ready as I'll ever be," Elliot replied, forcing a small smile. Ethan glanced up from his laptop. "We've got this," he said simply. His confidence steady and grounding. Elliot nodded, grateful for their presence. His teammates had always believed in him, even when he struggled to believe in himself. The hours passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. The final round of judging was set to begin in the afternoon, giving the team just enough time to rehearse their presentation one last time. Elliot's hands moved instinctively as he adjusted the prototype. But his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't ignore the weight of the stares from other competitors as they passed by. Most were fleeting, their expressions unreadable. But a few lingered just long enough to make him question their intent. Were they sizing him up as competition? Or was there something else, something unspoken that colored their judgment? He tried to push the thoughts away, but they clung to him like a shadow. Underscore 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 underscore. As the morning wore on, a familiar voice pulled him from his thoughts. Elliot. He turned to see Charlotte Hayes standing a few feet away. Her navy blazer as crisp and commanding as ever. She offered him a small, measured smile. "I thought I'd stop by to see how you're doing," she said. "We're doing okay," Elliot replied, glancing at his teammates. Charlotte's gaze shifted to the prototype on the table. "This looks impressive," she said. "I can tell you've put a lot of thought into it." "Thank you," Elliot said, his voice quiet. Charlotte studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Elliot hesitated. It was a simple question, but it carried an unexpected weight. He glanced at Lila and Ethan, who had stepped away to double-check the presentation materials. Then back at Charlotte. "I'm fine," he said at last. Charlotte raised an eyebrow, her expression gently skeptical. "Are you?" Elliot sighed, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "It's just, I feel like people are waiting for me to fail. Like they're questioning whether I even belong here." Charlotte's face softened, though her eyes remained sharp. "You're not imagining it," she said quietly. "There will always be people who question your place in spaces like this. People who see your potential and feel threatened by it, even if they don't realize it themselves." Her words were calm, matter of fact, but they carried a weight that made Elliot pause. "How do you deal with that?" he asked. "You prove them wrong," Charlotte replied simply. "Every day. In everything you do. You show up. You work hard. And you refuse to let their doubts define you. But you also have to remember that their judgment says more about them than it does about you." Elliot nodded slowly, letting her words settle over him. Charlotte glanced at her watch. "You've got a big day ahead," she said. "I just wanted to remind you that you've already earned your place here. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." "Thank you," Elliot said, his voice steadier now. Charlotte gave him a small nod before turning to leave. As she walked away, Elliot felt a quiet resolve take root in his chest. Underscore 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 underscore. When the time came for the final presentation, the team stood before the panel of judges in a spacious room filled with competitors and spectators. The air was heavy with expectation. But Elliot felt strangely calm. He took a deep breath as he began, his voice steady and clear. He spoke about the design process, the challenges they had faced, and the potential impact of their prototype. Lila and Ethan followed with their sections, each adding depth and detail to the presentation. The judges listened intently, their expressions unreadable but focused. When the presentation ended, they began their questions sharp and probing, designed to test the team's knowledge and adaptability. Elliot answered each question thoughtfully, drawing on the months of preparation that had brought them here. He didn't have all the answers, but he met every challenge with quiet confidence. By the time the session ended, the judges nodded their thanks and moved on to the next team. Elliot exhaled, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. "We did it," Lila said. Her voice filled with quiet excitement. You crushed it. Ethan added with a rare grin. Elliot smiled. A sense of accomplishment washing over him. For the first time in days. He felt like he could truly breathe. But as they left the room, he couldn't help but notice the way some of the other competitors avoided meeting his eyes. It wasn't hostility, it was something subtler. A discomfort that spoke volumes without saying a word. Elliot straightened his shoulders. Charlotte's words echoing in his mind. You've already earned your place here. And as the day drew to a close, he resolved to carry those words with him. No matter what came next. The auditorium buzzed with quiet anticipation as the crowd settled into their seats. Elliot sat among his teammates in the front row. The hum of conversation around him a backdrop to the thoughts racing through his mind. He clutched the program for the award ceremony. Its crisp paper wrinkling slightly under his fingers. On stage, a sleek podium stood beneath a banner reading, International STEM Innovation Competition 2024, Award Ceremony. The weight of the moment was heavy but not oppressive. Elliot felt a quiet pride mingling with his nerves. They had done everything they could. And now, it was out of their hands. Beside him, Lila leaned over. Her excitement barely contained. No matter what happens, she whispered. We've already accomplished so much. Elliot nodded, offering her a small smile. Yeah, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Ethan, sitting on Elliot's other side, glanced at them both. We'll be fine, he said simply. His steady demeanor a grounding force. The lights dimmed slightly. And the crowd hushed as the host stepped onto the stage. He was a charismatic man with a warm smile and an easy confidence. The kind of person who could command a room without trying too hard. Good afternoon, everyone, he began. His voice carrying easily across the auditorium. Today, we celebrate innovation, perseverance, and the incredible talent that has brought us all here. As the host continued, Elliot's gaze drifted to the audience. He scanned the faces, pausing briefly when he spotted Charlotte Hayes standing near the back of the room. She was watching the stage intently. Her expression calm but focused. When her eyes met his, she gave a small nod. As if to say, "You've got this." Elliot sat up a little straighter. His resolve firming. Underscore 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 underscore. The awards portion of the ceremony began with smaller categories, special recognitions, honorable mentions. Each announcement was met with applause. The winners walking onto the stage to accept their plaques with wide smiles and grateful nods. As the host reached the final category, the room seemed to hold its breath. And now, he said, pausing for effect, the moment we've all been waiting for. The winner of the International STEM Innovation Competition 2024 is. Elliot felt his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't realize he was holding his breath until the host spoke again. Team Horizon. For a moment, Elliot couldn't move. The words seemed to echo in his ears. Unreal and yet unmistakable. Elliot. Lila whispered sharply, grabbing his arm. That's us. The reality sank in all at once. And Elliot rose to his feet. His movements almost mechanical. Around him, the crowd erupted into applause. Lila and Ethan were already on their way to the stage. Their excitement palpable. Elliot followed. His steps slow but steady. As they reached the podium, the host handed them a gleaming trophy, its polished surface reflecting the stage lights. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment. Elliot stood at the center, the trophy in his hands, the weight of it grounding him. He looked out at the audience and found Charlotte again. She was smiling now, her expression warm and proud. For the first time in what felt like forever, Elliot allowed himself to smile a real, unguarded smile. Underscore 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 underscore. After the ceremony, the team was ushered into a side room where photographers and reporters waited. They posed for photos, answered questions about their project, and basked in the glow of their success. But for Elliot, the true weight of the moment didn't hit until later. When the crowd had thinned and he found himself alone with Charlotte in a quiet corner of the convention center. "Congratulations," she said, her tone steady but warm. "Thank you," Elliot replied, his voice quieter now. Charlotte handed him an envelope. "This is from the airline," she said. Elliot opened it carefully, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was a letter offering him a scholarship, full tuition to any university he chose, along with a mentorship program in engineering and innovation. He stared at the letter, the words blurring as his eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say," he managed. "Say yes," Charlotte said simply. "You've earned it." Elliot looked up at her, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," he said, the words heavy with meaning. Charlotte placed a hand on his shoulder. "This is just the beginning, Elliot," she said. "You've proven that you belong here. Now it's time to show the world what you can do." Her words stayed with him as he left the convention center that evening, the trophy in one hand and the scholarship letter in the other. Underscore 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 underscore. On the flight back home, Elliot sat in economy this time. But it didn't matter. The plane felt lighter, the journey different. The trophy rested on his lap, a tangible reminder of what he had achieved. As the plane descended, Elliot looked out the window at the familiar skyline of his hometown. He thought of his mother waiting for him at the airport, her pride and love a constant anchor in his life. This was just one victory, but it felt monumental, a stepping stone towards something far greater. And as the plane touched down, Elliot knew with quiet certainty that he was ready for whatever came next. The plane touched down with a soft jolt, its wheels connecting with the tarmac as Elliot leaned back in his seat. The hum of the engines slowly faded as the aircraft slowed, and the cabin became quiet, save for the occasional announcements from the flight crew. The weight of the trophy still rested heavily on his lap, a constant reminder of the journey he had just completed. But as the plane taxied toward the gate, Elliot's thoughts wandered back to the airport where it had all begun. The place where his journey had been questioned before it even started. He had expected that returning home would be a celebration. His friends, his teachers, his family would be proud. And they were. But there was still a lingering unease within him. Something he couldn't quite put into words. Maybe it was the subtle glances from the other competitors. Or the quiet judgment he had sensed from some people. Not just at the competition but along the way. Those small moments had a way of creeping up on him. Even in the midst of triumph. The airplane came to a complete stop. And the seatbelt sign clicked off. Elliot slowly stood up. Stretching his stiff limbs. His mind shifted back to the present. And the anticipation of seeing his mother, her proud smile. Her tired but loving eyes pushed the lingering discomfort from his thoughts. Underscore 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 underscore. The terminal was bustling as always. Passengers moving in every direction. Some hurried. Some relaxed. As Elliot walked toward the baggage claim, he scanned the crowd for his mother. He spotted her almost immediately. Standing near the exit with her tired face lit up by a smile that could have filled the room. "Elliot," she called. Her voice warm with relief and joy. Elliot walked toward her quickly. A weight lifting from his chest as their eyes met. She stepped forward and enveloped him in a tight hug. The kind of hug that only a mother could give. The kind that made everything feel right again. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Her voice thick with emotion. Elliot pulled back slightly. Holding out the trophy. "We won." "Mom," he said. His voice quiet but full of pride. "I know. Baby," she said. Her hands gently caressing his face. "I've been following everything. Watching every update. I knew you could do it." Her words. So simple and true. Were everything he had needed to hear. She had believed in him when no one else did. Had fought for him when the world seemed to ask why he mattered. But even as they stood there, embracing in the middle of the busy terminal, Elliot couldn't ignore the subtle shift in the air. The eyes that drifted to them, some curious. Some critical, lingered just a little longer than they should have. There was an undercurrent to the looks. An unspoken question of whether someone like him belonged here. Whether someone like his mother had the right to stand proudly in a place like this. It was a quiet thing. These looks. But they were there. In the way people glanced at him when he passed by. In the way some people seemed to hesitate before meeting his gaze. He had learned to ignore them over time. But in this moment, with his mother in his arms and the trophy in his hand, it felt different. He felt it more than ever, the weight of what had been. And what still was. Underscore 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 underscore. They walked to the parking lot together. Elliot's mother carrying the trophy for a moment. Her hands gently cupping it as if it were fragile. They didn't talk much on the drive home. The familiar silence between them comforting. The radio played softly in the background. Its news reports a quiet hum that seemed to belong to another world. As they neared their apartment, Elliot felt a strange sense of calm. The world outside, with all its uncertainties and quiet judgments, felt far away for the moment. But as they parked the car and stepped out, Elliot knew that he would have to carry that weight with him. Even here. Even in his own home. Inside. His mother settled into her favorite armchair. The familiar space making everything feel as though it had returned to normal. Elliot placed the trophy on the coffee table. Its gleaming surface catching the light from the overhead lamp. For a few moments, They sat in silence. Then his mother looked at him. Her gaze thoughtful. "You've come so far. Elliot," she said. Her voice gentle. "But don't forget that there are always going to be people who try to make you feel like you don't belong." Elliot didn't answer right away. The words felt like they had been said before. And yet they felt heavier now. "I know, Mom," he said softly. "It's just hard sometimes." His mother nodded. As if she understood. "It is. But you're stronger than that. You've already shown the world what you're capable of. And no one can take that from you." Elliot swallowed. Feeling the weight of her words. "I know. Sometimes I feel like I have to prove myself all over again. Every time." His mother smiled. A knowing smile. "You don't have to prove anything. Baby. You've already done it. Underscore 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 underscore. Later that night, Elliot sat at his desk. The room quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. His notebook lay open in front of him. The sketches for the sustainable energy prototype neatly drawn. But his mind wandered again. Back to the questions that had lingered all day, questions about belonging. About the subtle prejudice that seemed to hang in the air. Unnoticed by some. But felt deeply by others. He thought about Charlotte's words. The quiet assurance she had given him when he was unsure. He thought about the scholarship. The opportunities that awaited him. And how much they meant to his future. But there was a part of him. A part that had always been there. That remained uncertain. It wasn't just about the competition. It was about the way the world saw him. The way some people couldn't help but see him through a lens of doubt. Elliot closed his notebook slowly and looked out the window at the darkened sky. Tomorrow. He would go back to school. Back to the halls where his story had just begun to unfold. And as much as he wanted to ignore the lingering questions, he knew they would be there. Just beneath the surface. But for tonight, he let himself rest. Knowing that the journey was far from over. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the kitchen table where Elliot sat his breakfast untouched. The silence in the house was familiar. Comfortable even. But it held a different weight today. The events of the past few weeks had changed something inside him, something that made the quiet feel less peaceful. More filled with expectation. His mother had left for work early that morning. As usual. Her double shift at the hospital taking her from the apartment before the sun had fully risen. Elliot knew she would come home tired. But proud. It was her pride that kept him going. Even when his own doubts threatened to overwhelm him. The scholarship. The recognition. The opportunities that were beginning to unfold, all of it seemed so surreal. So far removed from the world he had grown up in. It was easy to forget that none of this would have been possible without his mother's tireless sacrifices. Without the hours she had spent working to make sure he had a chance at something better. But even now, as he sat with his thoughts, he couldn't escape the nagging feeling that he was still not fully accepted in some of the spaces he was beginning to occupy. He stood and walked to his desk. The envelope from the scholarship program still sitting on the corner of the table. He had read it a dozen times since returning from the competition. Each time finding a new line. A new opportunity. A new possibility. But there was still something lingering in the back of his mind. A question he hadn't yet been able to voice to anyone: would he ever truly belong? The doorbell rang. Pulling him from his thoughts. It was early for visitors. And his mother wasn't due back for hours. With a glance at the clock, Elliot opened the door. Standing on the other side was Miss Charlotte Hayes. Her navy blazer as sharp as ever. Her presence commanding yet gentle. "Elliot," she greeted him with a smile that was both warm and determined. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "No, not at all," Elliot said, stepping back to let her in. He couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride at seeing her again. After everything that had happened, she had been more than just a supporter at the competition. She had become a reminder of what was possible when someone believed in you. Charlotte looked around the apartment, her eyes lingering for a moment on the modest furnishings before returning to Elliot. "This is a nice place," she said, her voice neutral but not judgmental. Elliot smiled, though there was a tinge of unease in his chest. "It's home." They sat at the small dining table, where Elliot had left his breakfast. The conversation started with small pleasantries, but it quickly shifted as Charlotte's tone became more serious. "I wanted to talk to you about the mentorship program that comes with your scholarship," she began. "We've lined up some great opportunities, and I'd like to help guide you through them. There's a lot ahead of you, and it's going to take hard work. But I believe you're ready." Elliot felt a spark of excitement at the mention of the program. But it was quickly tempered by a question that had been lingering in the back of his mind since the competition: was he really ready? "Is it really going to be enough?" he asked, his voice quiet. "I mean, is just having this opportunity going to change anything? Or will people still look at me and see something else?" Charlotte studied him for a long moment, her expression thoughtful but firm. "You've already seen it, haven't you?" she said softly. "The way some people look at you. The way they question your place. Even when you've proven yourself. But Elliot, the only person who can decide where you belong is you. There will always be people who doubt you, who see you as less than you are. But that doesn't change who you are or what you're capable of." Elliot looked down at his hands, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of the table. Her words felt true, but they also felt distant. Like something he could only understand in theory but not yet fully accept in practice. "I don't know if I can keep proving myself." Over and over, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Charlotte's gaze softened, and she leaned forward slightly, her tone becoming more personal. "You don't have to keep proving yourself, Elliot. You've already done that. What you're doing now is building something that no one can take away from you. You're building your future. And it's yours to create. Whether or not people see that is not for you to control. But what you can control is how you respond. And right now, you've responded by showing up. By standing tall in spaces where others might have told you to sit down." Elliot absorbed her words, feeling their weight settle in his chest. It wasn't that they were easy to accept, but they were necessary. The truth was that he had already faced so many obstacles, whether they were at the airport or in the competition hall, and each time, he had found a way to overcome them. But it wasn't just the big moments that mattered. It was the quiet ones too. The ones where he walked into a room and simply refused to shrink back. Underscore 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 underscore. As the conversation turned toward the details of the mentorship program, Elliot felt a sense of clarity begin to form. There was work to be done, and he was ready for it. But more importantly, he was beginning to understand that his journey wasn't just about what he could prove to others. It was about what he could prove to himself. Charlotte's words echoed in his mind as she left. Her presence as steady and unwavering as when she had arrived. You don't have to prove anything, Elliot. You've already done that. Later that evening, after Charlotte had left, Elliot sat quietly at his desk. The evening sky darkening outside his window. He took out his notebook and began to sketch again. His hands steady as he mapped out ideas for new projects. This was what he had been working toward all along, the chance to create something that mattered. To build bridges where there had once been walls. And in the quiet of his room, with the weight of the day settling into his bones, Elliot realized that the first bridge he needed to build was the one within himself. The bridge that would carry him forward, no matter the doubts others might cast in his path. The morning had settled into an easy rhythm. The air was crisp. The sky a muted blue that seemed to stretch endlessly above the city. Elliot stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of his shirt as he prepared for another milestone, one he hadn't expected but now felt ready for. Today, he would speak in front of a crowd of students, mentors, and industry professionals at a global innovation summit. His speech, one he had written and rewritten in the weeks following his victory, was meant to be a testament to his journey, to the possibilities he had yet to explore, and to the obstacles that he had learned to rise above. He knew the weight of the words he was about to say. The weight they would carry not just for him but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The quiet doubts he had carried for so long still lingered in the back of his mind. But today, for the first time, they didn't feel quite as heavy. As he walked to the podium, the soft murmur of the audience buzzed in the air. The room was filled with an energy he couldn't quite place. There was an undercurrent of expectation, a sense that something significant was about to happen. He set his notes down on the lectern, adjusting the microphone and taking a deep breath. Behind him, the screen flickered to life, displaying the title of the session, Building Bridges, the Future of Innovation in STEM. Elliot adjusted his glasses and began. His voice was steady but quiet at first, careful as he chose his words. Good afternoon, he began, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. I'm Elliot James. And I'm here today because of the people who believed in me. Because of the opportunities that some said I didn't deserve. But mostly, I'm here because I've learned that no one can define your worth except you. He paused, letting the words settle. When I first started on this journey, I was told more than once that people like me didn't belong in spaces like this. I was told I wasn't good enough, that my background would limit me, that my race would hold me back. But what I've come to realize is that those voices, those doubts, they weren't mine. They were reflections of a world that isn't always kind to people who look like me. A world that sometimes believes it has the right to decide where we fit. There was a shift in the room as Elliot's words began to sink in. He could see the faces of the audience, some nodding in agreement, others listening intently, as if taking in something they hadn't fully considered before. He continued, his voice gaining strength with each sentence. But here's the thing, Elliot said. We don't need permission to exist in these spaces. We don't need anyone's validation to know that we matter. Every step I've taken, every challenge I've faced, has brought me here today. And every moment of doubt I've encountered, every moment when others tried to convince me that I didn't belong, that was a moment I used to fuel my drive, to prove them wrong. He glanced down at his notes, then back at the audience. I'm not saying this to boast, Elliot said softly, but because I believe that if I can stand here today, so can others. I'm one of many. I'm just a face in a crowd of people who are told they're not enough. But we are enough. We always have been. There was a stillness in the room now. A quiet understanding that had settled like dust after a storm. Elliot's heart raced. But his voice remained steady. He wasn't here to make grandiose claims. To demand change. He was here to share a simple truth. A truth that had become clear to him over time: change doesn't come from waiting for permission. It comes from standing firm in your own space. From showing up even when the world tells you to stay back. He took another breath. His hands resting gently on the lectern. The world may not always see us as we see ourselves, he said. But that's not where our power lies. Our power lies in knowing who we are. In understanding that we are worthy of taking up space. And in using that knowledge to build bridges where walls once stood. There was a long silence as the weight of his words hung in the air. The audience was still. Absorbed in the quiet strength that radiated from the young man at the podium. Elliot could feel the shift. Could sense the spark of something new beginning in the room. A recognition. Perhaps. That things didn't have to stay the same. I stand here today. Elliot continued. Not because I've done everything perfectly. But because I've learned that the journey itself is where we find our strength. We don't wait for the world to change, we change it ourselves. By showing up. By demanding our place. By making sure that no one is left behind. He paused again. Allowing the words to resonate. Because. In the end. The world is shaped by those who refuse to be silent. By those who stand up even when it's easier to sit down. And by those who, like all of us here today, have dreams bigger than the barriers that try to keep them small. Elliot smiled. Just a little. As he finished. He wasn't sure if everyone understood exactly what he meant. But he knew that this moment was his. And it was the beginning of something far larger than just one speech or one victory. It was the beginning of something that could change the way people saw him and the way he saw himself. The applause began softly. Then grew. Elliot stood tall as the room acknowledged his words. But he knew the real work was just beginning. There would be more challenges ahead. More people who would try to tell him where he belonged. But that didn't matter. Not anymore. The real journey was about to unfold. And he was ready to walk it. Step by step. As the applause died down and the crowd began to rise from their seats, Elliot felt a quiet satisfaction settle in his chest. This wasn't just a speech. It was a declaration. Both for himself and for everyone who had ever been made to feel less than they were. We belong here.